As they entered the church, the cool, solemn air wrapped around them, filling California with a sense of familiarity and calm. She placed a steady hand on Macaulay's shoulder, feeling him tense beside her. She could see his gaze darting around the sanctuary, wary but intrigued, taking in the towering ceilings and the soft glow of candlelight flickering from a side altar. They were barely halfway down the aisle when a nun appeared in a dark habit, her expression both inquisitive and kind as she looked them over. She focused on Macaulay, her brow lifting slightly as she took in his ragged clothes and nervous expression. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone professional but warm. Sue stepped forward, her voice gentle. "We're here to see Father Trevors. It's important." The nun looked them over once more, then nodded, gesturing for them to follow. "He's in his office, working on his sermon." They followed her down a narrow corridor, the walls lined with framed portraits of saints and soft, flickering candles, each flame casting shadows that danced across the floor. Macaulay looked up at California, his eyes questioning, and she gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. When they reached Father Trevor's office, the nun knocked softly and a warm, familiar voice answered, "Come in." The nun opened the door and stepped aside, allowing them to enter. Father Trevors was seated at his desk, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a small desk lamp. He looked up, his eyes lighting up as he recognized Sue and California. Rising quickly, he approached them with open arms, his expression filled with warmth and genuine happiness. "Well, if it isn't two of my favorite people," he exclaimed, embracing Sue first, then California. As he pulled back, his eyes landed on Macaulay, his smile widening with curiosity. "And who is this young man?" Sue glanced at Macaulay, then at California. California gave a small nod of encouragement, and Sue cleared her throat. "Father, this is Macaulay. We found him. Well, he found us, I suppose. It's a long story." Father Trevor's eyes softened as he looked at Macaulay, his gaze filled with kindness. "Well, it's wonderful to meet you, Macaulay." He gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Please come in. Sit down. I have a feeling there's quite a bit to talk about." They settled into the chairs, Sue and California on either side of Macaulay. California could feel the tension radiating off him, and she placed a hand on his shoulder, hoping to offer some comfort. Father Trevor sat across from them, folding his hands on the desk, his attention focused on Macaulay with a quiet, steady patience. After a moment, Macaulay cleared his throat, glancing nervously at California and Sue, and then back at Father Trevor's. I don't know where to start," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Father Trevors leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Why don't you start wherever feels right, Macaulay? Whatever you feel comfortable sharing." Macaulay hesitated, then took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the edge of his seat. "My mom, she died last year," he began, his voice trembling slightly. She was using stuff. Drugs, I mean. She was trying to get clean, but it just didn't happen. She didn't make it." California felt a familiar ache settle in her chest as she listened, the pain of old memories mixing with the sorrow she felt for Macaulay. She knew what it was to feel abandoned by people who couldn't fight their way out of their own struggles, people who loved you but couldn't be there for you. Her hand tightened on his shoulder, her heart breaking for the boy beside her. Father Trevors nodded, his expression full of sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Macaulay. That must have been incredibly difficult." Macaulay shrugged, his gaze fixed on a spot on the floor. "After she died, I didn't have anyone. My dad's in prison. Been in and out my whole life. He's not a good guy. I don't even know if he knows she's gone." His voice took on a bitter edge. "The rest of my family, well, they didn't want anything to do with me. No one from the tribe would take me in. They all know about my dad, what he did. They didn't want the trouble." Sue's hand moved to rest gently on his other shoulder, her voice soft and steady. "That must have felt so lonely, Macaulay." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I didn't want to stay there. It was just bad. My mom used to say the res was like a trap. People just end up stuck there. And the casinos, everyone thinks they're this big, fancy place, but they're not. Only a few people actually get anything out of them. The rest, they just drink. That's what everyone does out there. They drink, or they get high." My mom, she tried to stay away from it, but it just pulled her back in. And everyone else, he hesitated, his jaw clenching. They're just waiting to die. California felt her throat tighten, a wave of anger and sadness swelling within her. She'd seen this world too, this world where hope was a luxury and survival was the only goal. She thought of herself at his age, running from an abusive foster home, wandering the streets at night, feeling as if the world had closed its doors on her. It's not fair, she said quietly, almost to herself. None of this is fair. Father Trevors nodded, his gaze steady and compassionate. Macaulay, you've been through so much more than most people your age could imagine. And despite it all, you're still here. That takes strength. Macaulay looked down, a slight frown on his face. I don't feel strong, he murmured. I feel like I don't belong anywhere. A pang of empathy shot through California, a deep and painful resonance that made her heart ache. She knew that feeling all too well. And in that moment, she felt something fragile and terrifying stirring inside her, a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she could be someone who helped him find a place to belong. Macaulay, she said softly, her voice rough with emotion, you have a place with us, if you want it. He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes, as if he hadn't expected to hear those words. Sue reached out, her voice filled with a quiet strength. Father, we don't want him going back to the streets. We want to foster him, make him part of our family. But we need your help. We don't know how to go about it. Father Trevors nodded, his expression thoughtful as he leaned back, folding his hands in his lap. You've come to the right place. The foster care system in California is complex, but there are paths you can take to give Macaulay a home. California and Sue listened intently as he explained. Given Macaulay's situation, the most direct route would be to pursue what's called a non-relative extended family member status. This status allows for a quicker placement with people who may not be blood related, but have a family-like relationship. Now, you've just met, but with some documentation and statements from people like me who can verify your commitment, we can make a strong case that you're ready to be his guardians. Sue nodded, her hand tightening on Macaulay's shoulder. So, we could really foster him without waiting months in the system? Father Trevors smiled gently. Yes, but you'll need to pass a home study to show you can provide a safe environment. This involves interviews, background checks, and a visit to ensure your home is suitable for a child. And Macaulay, you'd have to agree to this. You'd have to be willing to be part of this family. Macaulay looked up, his expression shifting between disbelief and hope. You mean, I could actually stay with them? Really? Father Trevors nodded, his gaze warm. Yes, if that's what you want, and if California and Sue are committed, we can start the process right away. I know a contact in social services who can help us expedite the home study and paperwork. Macaulay's face softened, a tentative smile breaking through his guarded expression. I'd like that. I don't want to go back to the streets. California felt a surge of relief mixed with a fierce protectiveness. She knew what it felt like to be cast aside, to be invisible. And she knew with a certainty that both terrified and exhilarated her that she wanted to give Macaulay the stability, the love, and the family he'd been denied. Father Trevors stood, his eyes filled with pride and compassion as he looked at the three of them. You're doing something remarkable here. It's not easy and it's not a simple process, but it's worth it. And I'll be here to help you every step of the way. They stood and he embraced each of them, his warmth and encouragement settling over them like a blessing. As they walked out of the church, the cool morning air brushed against their faces, and California felt that small, terrifying glimmer of hope ignite into something stronger. She glanced at Sue and Macaulay, the makeshift family she hadn't known she was searching for, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe in a future where they were all part of each other's lives. They walked back to the car together, a quiet determination settling over them. They had challenges ahead, but they had each other. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough.